I'd like to say sunny Brisbane. Yeah, we had some hot weather down in Sydney yesterday. So looking forward to this meetup. It's a slightly different flavour, and we've got our two presenters in the same room together, which is a bit of an anomaly these days. So I just want to give you a brief rundown about where I see the market as well before we start. So I think for a lot of you, it's also been quite an interesting time. Recently, the market's been a bit of fluctuation. I've seen a lot of clients, particularly in the architecture space, looking at shorter, sharper engagements. So personally, I've had a lot of requests for sort of 8 and 12-week engagements, rather than sort of 6 and 12 months, so to do very high-level scoping. There's a lot of noise still around the AI space and how that's going to affect architectural organizations looking at their environments. I think there's a lot of war chests around organizations wanting to spend money, but not quite sure what to do with. And I think, after Trump's announcement yesterday, there seems to be a lot more positivity with a lot of clients I'm speaking to, and whether or not that money is going to flow down into projects. So I think the expectation is probably next year from early kickoff is going to be quite busy. But things might change. But last year was pretty busy in Jan, and I think that will change as well. So I'd like to welcome everyone. So if everything is a priority and nothing is, the architecture's role in portfolio discipline. So thanks to Matt and Ben for joining us. I'll give you a brief rundown of our two lovely consultants. So Ben's going to ask a lot of questions and put Matt on the spot. So Matt's a principal consultant at Making Gains Consulting. Matt is a transformational portfolio management advisor who partners executives and architecture leaders in connected strategy, investment, and delivery. He has more than 2 years experience across Asia Pacific region, and he's an embedded portfolio management frameworks that turn ambition into achievable, value-driven outcomes. And Matt previously used to work for Rolls-Royce in engines way back in the day. So nice claim to fame there. Ben Wu. Ben's a regular attendee to our meetups, and I've known Ben for a long time. Ben is a principal consultant, business service consultant at NetApp. As we're disappointed he's not all and it's NetApp gear to today, unfortunately. So Ben is a data strategy expert who connects business strategy to data-driven realization with enterprise portfolios. He's got over 4 years dedication, over 4 decades dedication experience across Asia Pacific region globally, and is a key player in one of the most innovative digital tier 1 organizations. So after that, Matt and Ben, I'll lead over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for that warm introduction, Andrew. So, although I recently had a side motion to principal consultant, I still, wear my enterprise architecture roots very proudly. Right, I believe it's a great vehicle to get things done with value in an organization. So, I'm glad to be here with you today. And what we want to do is make sure that you get value from today's conversation. So, look, how Andrew described our roles may sound very similar, and there's probably a little bit of overlap in the functions that Matt and I do. But Matt, can you please define for us what portfolio management is as distinct from enterprise architecture in your mind?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Ben. Now, I think a lot of people think of portfolio management in the same way they have program management and project management, which is all about delivery. And you have PMO offices that people aren't sure whether the P is for program, portfolio, or project. So in a nutshell, for me, portfolio management is all about strategic investment governance. So it's how you invest your money to achieve your strategy. And there's many more things too. But really what you're trying to do is deliver measurable value. And you need to be able to ensure that you are linking investments to architecture and outcomes. And I think that's really in a nutshell where I start off, perhaps. We'll perhaps go into some of these a bit more. But Ben, I'm interested to know how you define enterprise architecture. And particularly, I know you're a fan of portfolio management, but why?
Well, enterprise architecture is simply the framework, capability, and process to take an organization from current state to a desired or defined future state. Right? It provides a blueprint and capability map to realize a strategy, right? And so for me, what I like about portfolio management is it provides answers to the question, should we? Now the EA answers, can we and how best should we achieve that, right? So there is a distinction in the roles, although we speak a common language, right? So together, portfolio management and enterprise architecture form a closed loop that starts with strategy, looks at investment decisions, and then development of the architecture, delivery, and realization of benefits. And then you loop back around and look at where how your strategy has moved because you've now achieved those benefits.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's really good. I mean, I probably to answer your question before about the difference, I think an analogy that somebody once said was that an enterprise architecture, an architect develops the map of the city, so to speak, but portfolio management is like the budgetary committee, the council budget committee that decides where the investments go to build that city. And I quite like that. Yeah, I think one of the things that I perhaps in simple terms, as an analogy, I quite often will see an IT manager or even a CIO perhaps tell an enterprise architect to go and do a lift and shift into, let's say, public cloud or something.
Yep.
And to me, that's the tail wagging the dog. For me, it's how are we going to, the business saying to IT, how are we going to achieve this strategy? How are you going to help enable us with technology to achieve this strategy? And for technology, for IT to come back and say, well, there's 3 different ways we could do this. We've done some analysis and we believe this is the best way. It's a lift and shift to public cloud, for example.
Yeah. So in a nutshell, how would you define portfolio management in simple terms?
Well, I think that's how I'd say it's about that governance. I think we both talk about frameworks and governance of getting from the current state to the future state. But for portfolio management, it's actually all about the investments and also making informed decisions as you go about where you invest, because you don't just, as an enterprise architect doesn't just say, here's the vision, and then you go and make a cup of tea and say, I'll come back in 5 years and see what a good job you've done. It's an iterative process, right?
Yep, sure. So I'm going to go off script here, Matt, before we move on, right, and say, well, I'm an enterprise architect. I've been to the cloud conference and I've come back with a cloud glow. It's probably orange, right? And I've said, there's heaps of value in moving this application to the cloud. We should do it right now because we're bleeding money on it where it's running now. And by moving to the cloud, we can scale out, we can control resources, and we can reduce our cost and risk and improve our business agility. Why shouldn't I do it right now, Matt?
I love the fact you're going off script,
yeah,
because it enables me to as well now. You were the one that put me in. You've recommended the Design to Win by Aaron Rass.
Yes.
Right? And as a member of the Business Architecture Guild, I really saw value in that. So to try and say what that book says to me is that to win, you need to find. It's not about saying it's my plan for the highway. It's about finding what everybody is happy to do, and that's the win. That's the strategy. So, to answer your question, it's about saying, well, let's get as many people together, not everybody, but the right people together, to understand and critically analyze what it means to do that, and why we're doing that.
Yeah. So getting the right stakeholders to the table.
Yeah.
So often the EA will get delivery stakeholders to the table, like the head of IT, the server manager, the network manager, the storage manager, the backup manager, cybersecurity people, and they call them stakeholders, and they are for delivery, but perhaps not for the business outcome.
I agree. Yeah, I totally agree. The question I have for you is, a lot of people see enterprise architects as being very IT technical.
Yes.
And yet the idea that an enterprise architect is different from an application architect. There's different layers, right? So how does an enterprise architect connect the technology to the needs of the business?
Well, that's quite an interesting question. Often, an enterprise architect will inherit a portfolio management function just because of their role or title. But coming from a technical background, the value they perceive for themselves is the ability to get the job done, right? So they tend to move into an executional mindset because to the executives they're working with, it's activity, right? And it's good activity, but is it activity against the right outcome? So fast forward that example of moving that application to the cloud. Now, architect's done that job, fill a green tick, I've done the transformation to the cloud. Now the cloud bill comes in, right? And there's a cybersecurity breach, or DNS goes down, or authentication in the cloud goes down, right? What do you do then? Typically, an architect will say, I've done the transformation, that's an operational problem. But how does that impact those impacts on the business? How does that loop back into portfolio management? Because that's now a realized risk. So what would you say to the EA that had done that, right, as a portfolio manager?
Well, I think there's every reason why an enterprise architect could be a portfolio manager as well.
Yes.
I think what one of the problem is an enterprise architect can't be good at everything.
Yep.
And one of the key things that I think portfolio manager can help an enterprise architect is, let's say it's an executive board meeting of some kind, whether that's a project program board or a main board of an organization. But the portfolio manager is the guy in the room or girl in the room that will turn around and say, I can endorse that what they're saying is we do need to do this.
Yes.
For these reasons, for these business requirements, not because somebody in IT thinks it's a good idea.
Yes. So I think you and I had a conversation once about we were talking about IT value versus business value, and I think, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think the idea that we came back with is that there's no such thing then. It's all business value.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so in that example, I would say that transparency of value is in the long-term outcomes, not just the transformation that is the current state to future state, but the outcomes of the changes that resulted from moving from current state to future state.
So an example for that is I did some work with a hospital health service, and I was looking at a prioritization model that would go into the portfolio management framework, sort of the investment management framework side of things. And then when it came to rolling it out, we did some workshops with some senior people at the hospital health service, a lot of which were medical staff. And I had this big debate with a doctor who could not believe that a building is as important as clinical services.
Yes.
And it's only when I kept pressing and saying, well, how are those clinical services going to be delivered, did they come to the conclusion that they could actually, you could compare clinical services with a building, apples to apples, to say that's what needs to happen, rather than having a capital plan that had a different set of criteria to clinical services plan.
Yeah, that's very true, because EAs are called enterprise architects, but it usually is around digital enablement of the supply chain and value chain, right? So how would you advise EAs to expand their scope to include things like buildings and physical assets and things like that?
Well, I presume that a good enterprise architect will have those in the plan. It's about knowing which you need to do first, and what's the right order, what resources are required to do it, what capabilities you have. And we've talked in the past about value streams and capabilities, which obviously fits into my love of business architecture. But it needs to be in the plan, and you need to take all of these things together.
So would you say that having enterprise architects create or establish a mentoring relationship with a portfolio manager would be like a winning factor in making EAs more effective?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that we've discussed in the past is it's all very well coming up with frameworks, and in portfolio management, that's what I do as a consultant, is say, how do we embed something that we haven't done before? So having the framework is one thing, but you've got to make it work. And so for me, the key way of getting it to work is making sure you embed it into the business and get the cadence right. So another analogy there is that an organization that doesn't have portfolio management practices might do a strategic planning exercise at some point in the year, and then go straight into budgetary planning for the annual budgets coming up. There's no middle ground that says, okay, that's the new look of the strategic plan. We've tweaked it a little bit. What does that mean for all of the investments that we've got going on in programs and projects of work? And what do we need to do in those that portfolio of investments that needs to happen over the next 12 months to inform the budgetary decision. And if you can get the cadence into the organisation, it's got to be fit for purpose for the organisation, so it's no one rule fits all, then you start to get the point that portfolio management becomes a recognised capability of importance.
Okay, so let me give you a scenario, Matt. If I'm working as a chief enterprise architect in a large multinational organization, and I'm starting to get constrained by conflicting priorities, my own personal bandwidth hitting limits, right? And my skill set and capability hitting the edges, where I might be able to go and Google or ChatGPT something and find an answer, but I'm not really an expert in that area like portfolio management. Would it be wise to look at augmenting my team if I've got budget and headcount, right, with portfolio management as opposed to another EA, right, to augment what I'm doing?
Yeah, I think an interesting point that you just said there is that as the EA, you're hitting constraints, and actually it's the organisation that's hitting constraints. And again, let's not go into silos here. It's the organisation that we're delivering for here, and it's really important to remember that. So whether or not that portfolio manager augments the enterprise architect, or the enterprise architect is augmenting a portfolio management office, it doesn't matter. That's semantics to me. It's about the organisation carrying that capability, and it needs to fit and sit in the right part of the organisation and with the right stakeholders engaged for it to work.
And how would you say the combination of portfolio management and enterprise architecture skills improves a pitch to the board around what they should invest in and creating success as a result of that change?
I think, well, one of the things as a portfolio manager that I would put hand on heart and say is that I'm not a technical expert. So what we're trying to achieve, I need to have experts around me that do know what they're doing. And if the portfolio manager and the enterprise architecture are singing from the same song sheet, then that will give confidence to the executive management that we're doing the right thing.
Yep.
Would you agree? Or
I agree. And ostensibly, they would be peer roles, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, different functions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so Matt, going off script again, where have you seen that engagement between portfolio management and architecture and delivery fall apart? And what lessons would there be learned out of that?
Oh yeah, I do a lot of consulting for a lot of organisations. So I see instances where there's a good enterprise architecture function. That's quite rare. It's normally trapped underneath the CIO, and it's possibly at best a solution architect, more of a solution or a number of solution architects, with one perhaps preferring to take on the EA hat, so does so more than anybody else. And also, if there is a portfolio management function, it's quite often trapped under the corporate services umbrella, the CFO, and doesn't. It's almost like never the twain shall meet.
Yes.
And so for me, successful delivery of a portfolio management function is bringing out the best of both, and bringing them together and connecting.
Yeah. So something like a community of excellence amongst some very select leaders in the organisation that share a common goal and have complementary yet overlapping functions, right?
Absolutely, and of course you have different layers. So
yes,
there's the portfolio management layer, which fits with the enterprise architecture layer. But then the project layers, you're going to have cabs. You're going to have your architectural review boards. You're going to have everything that's required to make sure that all the cogs that are underneath the big cog are all turning together to fit together.
Yeah, fantastic. So that sounds like how you would make it work in reality, right? To avoid those challenges with things falling apart.
Absolutely. Yeah, cool. Yeah. So where we got to, I think, here was I think we were going to get to the point where I'm interested to listen to what others got to say. So maybe we could open it up to the floor and see if there's anybody that has a different view of what portfolio management is, or if you see things that worked well, or perhaps things that really are your bugbear and you'd like to see work better.
I'd love to hear some juicy war stories.
Yeah, well, absolutely.
So please go ahead.
If you want to raise a hand, or Andrew, if you have anything to add.
Well, I know that Andy Burgess and Dave are normally good for a few pointing questions, so not to put them on the spot.
Yeah, happy to take questions as well.
Yeah, I'll go with a question. So in organizations that don't have that portfolio management, what's the role of the enterprise architect in that? Is it to combine some of those same skills and align to those principles and formats, or what? Because not all organizations are going to have that. So I can see the importance, and thank you for sharing your views, but what would happen in a situation where you don't have portfolio management?
So Matt, I think it's one for you.
Yeah. So we'll quite often see sub-portfolios. So IT might have a sub-portfolio because they recognise the need of a portfolio office within IT. I'd like to be the guy that comes in and champions as an EPMO and isn't simply a reporting function to a CFO. So it's not just like the CFO getting closer to what's going on in projects and what's delivering, what isn't. But you've got to take baby steps a little bit on this. And so I think the EA's role is to be able to say, you've asked me a good question there, and I would like to be able to answer that in the best way possible. But the best way possible is if I've got a portfolio manager standing next to me that can talk your language and you'll believe more than me, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So in my experience, what I found is that the ITEA, right, or a very good ITEA, will also inherit, by accident, the role of the IT portfolio manager. So they have this inherent knowledge to go and work with the CIO to help the CIO manage their investments. However, the CIO is given a budget from the CFO and the CEO, and that can come along with some strings attached, right, which may not align to portfolio, maybe personal interests or personal conflicts, things like that. And so often the EA is constrained to trying to manage that sub-portfolio, as Matt said, without any linkage of context back to the greater business portfolio, especially where the CIO is, I'll say, has an ego and wants to establish the IT department as its own little business within the business. That's always a sign of potentially toxic culture, right? EAs do need to connect with the portfolio management function, possibly as an alternate channel for communicating some of these frustrations and challenges with getting the job done in creating value for the organization.
Another example, which I think is relevant here, is dealing with a lot of government departments, and let's take the Hospital Health Service one as a classic, Queensland Health, where a politician goes to visit a city and suddenly announces that they're going to spend, let's say, 5 to 20 million on some kind of new project. It's out of the blue. It leaves everybody screaming because the enterprise architects go, well, that's not in our plan. That's not what we intended to do. And all of the from a portfolio management perspective, you've got to reprioritize. You might even have your prioritization framework, but if you put this new politician's project into that framework, it would score at the very lowest end. But you can't say no because it's got to be done. So you have to work as an organization to do the best you can to still deliver what you're trying to achieve and satisfy the needs of your paymasters.
Yes. So Matt, you bring up a very important point there. It's not just about the technical delivery of those outcomes. There are human-centered aspects in terms of relationship experience and learned behaviors and possibly traumas, right? And interpersonal toxicity or collaboration. That's probably a subject that can be explored in greater detail. And we're familiar with organizations like Innovations Accelerated, who is headed by a guy called Eddie Koo, who spent 20 years at Commonwealth Bank as the innovation lead. He has also presented in the past at the Bridge Search several years ago. And he's got some interesting updates, which I'm sure he'll share in a separate session. So yeah, that'll be a really interesting one. But coming back to the question at hand around portfolio management, I'll tell a war story if everyone's got 5 minutes for a war story. Okay. So I've done quite a lot of work for IT departments in service enabling IT. So moving IT from a CapEx technology procurement organization and a reactive break fix maintenance organization to establishing an internal service unit that's either a non-profit provider or a for-profit provider, different business models. And what I've found is that often IT will charge ahead and go, this is the best thing in sliced bread. We want to be like the public cloud providers. We want to do equivalents. And the business goes, I have no idea you're doing this. We're not ready to adopt that. Or we've got plans elsewhere. And so talking people off the ledge with that, bringing them back together is an aspect of portfolio management. But if you do it just in IT, the rest of the business doesn't really see much relevance in that. So it's like, oh, it's just another IT. If you go back to the business portfolio management function, you start to see the motivations further up the tree to make better decisions.
Yeah.
Okay. More on that later. I think Chris has got his hand up.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks. You're referring to enterprise architecture broadly. It's multidisciplinary, and its primary focus, as you've specified, is to connect strategy to execution. But if you're thinking about enterprise architecture as the gold coin, and its heads and tails, it's business facing. That's what we're now trying to get everybody to understand is business architecture. And then there's the collection of technology facing sides of enterprise architecture in information tech, security, et cetera, right? So I think what and if you're doing enterprise architecture with a business functional lens on it and carving out that business architecture function, you're fundamentally doing capability-based planning, and one of the primary objectives, and this is where the linkage to portfolio planning is to facilitate and drive out the conversations around what initiatives we should be doing, whether they're people, process, information technology, or some aggregation of all of the above to uplift the capability. So, how are you seeing that role, the business architect, emerging, and are you seeing it as pivotal as I am into properly connecting architecture and portfolio?
That's a really good point, Chris. So from my personal viewpoint, enterprise architecture has grown out of IT because they needed it to get technology delivered, right? And it's grown up. So it's become a bottom-up kind of thing that's grown out to reach up as best it can to the business. So we need these value drivers to be able to understand what the business needs. And if you look at methodologies and frameworks like TOGAF, it does that. It almost looks very loose how it does that. It's got a bit lost, and I can understand why the enterprise architect needs that connection. So from a portfolio management point of view, and that's why I value, and I'm a member of the Business Architecture Guild, is the business should be taking the lead on what its value drivers are and what it needs from technology. And so to me, that is the connection. To answer your question, Chris, I see it as badly as you do. It's not. It's a very slow process. The more mature companies are adopting it, but I still see in government and in SMEs, the small medium enterprises, that they see it as a cost burden that they can't handle.
It feels like it's an overhead, but it's actually an investment, right?
It's an investment, absolutely.
Yeah. And Chris, just to reflect that, I see the same thing. So when I, as you mentioned before, Chris, I often see people taken from the technical ranks and promoted to an EA because that's the only way they can get the pay grade that will keep them around. But they're very reactive and reticent to develop those true EA skills because they don't think it's their primary core strength, because they're technically motivated, but they see the role of the technical architect as being constraining and all a bit sort of like, grease monkey, because that's just how people talk about things. So I think changing the perception of architects in an organization is a key factor. And also, Chris, I think there's a shift in the marketplace in that building technology infrastructure as a TA is a role that is diminishing because of the amount of automation and the standard building blocks you can buy off the shelf these days, which are quite advanced. So intelligent data infrastructure, which is one of the capabilities that NetApp hinges on, means that you can simplify the way you deploy IT, right? You plug and play, basically. So EAs need to move up into the capability to assemble modules of functionality as opposed to govern the way that, say, WAN and fabric connections are made in the back of the data center, for example. And so EAs are being, if you like, compelled to work more with the business, articulate the value more in business terms, but it requires a mindset shift. And it requires us to strengthen that business architecture function within our EA skill set.
Yeah, I think it's a survival skill, right? If EA is always reacting to something that the business has done for the purpose of execution, it will never be a transformational change agent. It has to be in business speak. It has to connect strategy to execution through course of action, and in doing so with capability-based planning, drive that initiative portfolio. The portfolio management ultimately needs to manage.
Yeah.
I think Samir's got the same as well. Thanks, Chris. Samir, you're on mute, mate. Samir, you're on mute, mate.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks. Yeah, we see the business priorities change all the time. How do we resequence? I mean, as an enterprise architect, how we can help resequence the priorities without affecting the long-term architectural outcomes? Yeah, whether it's market changes or the compliance, whatever that causes the business change. So how do we go about it?
That's a good question. I'll take that one. So remember, if you subscribe to models like TOGAF or Zachman and use them as a reference models for architecture development, right? It's generally a cycle. It never finishes, right? So when you talked about maintaining the architecture, the structure of the architecture, right? That could be a goal that you have in the short to medium term, but because things are changing so quickly in the marketplace, new capabilities coming to the fore. Reviewing that architecture model and updating it is a continuous process, right? So it's continuous adjustment. But coming back to the earlier part of your question, right? How do we make those? How do we go through those cycles while we maintain that direction towards architecture vision, right? Is working with portfolio management to identify the impact or the consequence of change at the business level. So as an example, we say we're going to establish an AI capability in the organization because we want to satisfy these AI use cases, and they're going to drive our business, business outcomes. We might get halfway through delivering something that is perhaps built in a particular environment, right? And then suddenly cybersecurity come down and say, well, actually that is critical data. You can't put that there, right? And then you have to reset the infrastructure and the locality of the data, but you still want to achieve those outcomes, right? And so you say, well, let me see if I can build that in environment B, right? That's a typical EA thing, is find a solution to the problem, right? Get through the obstacles, work with the PMs. We might need to shift some resources around, so get people who can do things like build data pipelines, right? What I would suggest we do is, instead of just reacting to that input and saying, I have a current delivery process to overcome that and get to the outcomes, go back to portfolio management and say, hey, this is a potential change that has an impact on the business, right? So that delaying that project may create issues with competitiveness, because if you deliver that capability late, you can't take advantage of the market, and therefore it's a bad investment. So portfolio management will say, well, can you do that in 3 months? Yes, we can. Okay, so it still meets the hurdle rate for investment. But if it takes you 6 months, it's going to be break even, and it'll be below the hurdle rate. But okay, we learned some lessons, some intangible benefits from that, as in our learnings, learn how to do better. And it takes 12 months, it's a dead loss, right? Some costs not recoverable, but the write-off is a loss. So that would be a red, and that will completely kill your prospects in doing anything AI ever again, because the board will just say no, right? And they'll go buy it from outside, and existential crisis, right? So that conversation with portfolio management can be very useful to EAs to understand the best course of action, and possibly ideate on alternate courses of action, right? So Matt might say to me, so have you explored, say, AI in the box, where you can just stand up like a test lab environment, and click of fingers, it might cost you a little bit more, and you take more out of your budget, but you can actually prove the veracity of that outcome very quickly in a minimum viable environment, and then throw it away. Therefore, there's no ongoing cost. It will have like an X% impact on the bottom line if you are successful.
It's interesting because you've answered the question in a very technical way, or using technical analogies, I suppose. Because when you said about shifting, just changing priorities, which is a bit like the politician announcing suddenly they've got some money from somewhere. But I would say that there's a couple of things there. One is that how you embed portfolio management comes down to that cadence, right? And the cadence needs to take into account the environment that the business is operating in, and how much shifting priorities happen. Because the changes change, it's always going to happen. To me, it's about how, spinning an oil tanker, turning it 180 degrees takes a long time. Spinning a jet ski 180 degrees takes no time at all. It really comes down to how quickly you can turn the wheel. So it's how you embed that cadence to try and answer your question succinctly, as concisely as possible. It's how quickly you can turn the wheel given the cadence of the organization.
Being probably agile is probably the way.
Yeah, I'm glad. I'm very impressed with how you can take all the technical mumbo jumbo that I come up with and sort of summarize it in a very quick sort of thought.
It's probably not missed on anybody that we've known each other for a number of years, and this is what we sound like when we're having a gin and tonic.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah. Ooh, what happened there? Sorry, we just had a weird thing where meat went on a blink.
The screen went white rather than blue, which is good that we don't have those days of the blue screen of death. Anybody else got their hands up?
So Chris has got another question.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks. Thanks again. We're obviously all seeing prevalence and emergence, and lots of discussion and controversy around using AI in EA. What are you seeing in using AI in portfolio management, and the opportunity to use it to bring both of those together?
Yeah, I know a number of people that are working on AI for not just portfolio management it's predominantly in delivery at the moment. It's about how you report, how you get, I suppose, a better finger on the pulse and better predictability about what's going to happen. And I always believe that that AI is nothing without human intelligence behind it as well. So it is happening. So it's as with most AI instances, it's more automation than it is anything else, with a little bit of AI put in. And at the moment, it's happening around the sort of reporting side, finger on the pulse about the direction that projects are going in, and a little bit about investment governance as well.
Yeah. So what I've seen is that organizations are actually also looking at lowering the barrier to understanding the complex concepts in portfolio management and EA. And that's a good thing, because it means that the whole organization starts to get an awareness for the importance of portfolio management and EA. So what we've seen in our practice is that organizations are establishing RAG, right, with what I would consider to be SLMs, right, so small language models, rather than generalized LLMs,
Yeah.
right? And what they're doing is they're actually defining and weighting the glossary of known terms quite strongly. So when the organization goes to query the AI and say something like, well, within our portfolio, right, what capabilities do we have to do X, right? The engine actually produces quite usable results out of that conversation, right? But they can query it using natural language, which makes it very, very accessible to the non-tech and non-innovation parts of the business, right? And so we're finding that's very useful, right? And lessons learned type questions like, tell me about, give me the 3 worst outcomes that we've had in projects in the last 12 months, right? And the SLM is very good at answering those sorts of questions, right? So I'm seeing a lot of that application in, we used to call them expert systems. Remember how with expert systems that would answer very specific questions around, how long is a piece of string, or, what thickness do I need for a bracket to hold up this weight of object on the end of my wall, that kind of stuff. That's essentially, SLMs are a smarter way of doing that. That's more accessible to the general, I'll call it the punters in the organization. Yeah, so it demystifies, but doesn't take the value away from portfolio management and EA.
Yeah. Chris, did you have thoughts on that? The other Chris, there's another Chris with a hand up, but let's, Chris.
Chris, I just got a quick question. As you've been talking about portfolio management, what skills or expertise of portfolio management do you think is useful to an enterprise architect to either work in or work with portfolio management?
That's a really good question. I think I mentioned that I have a corporate finance background, so I think that whichever background you originally came from, you sort of always tend to have a tendency to put more importance on that. But to try and answer your question in the best way possible without sounding like I'm dodging the question, you want the best portfolio manager that's going to be able to work together with you and communicate with all stakeholders. So you've got to find the one that perhaps fills the gaps that you don't have, it's that complements you as best as possible, and that can sort the parts of the organization that you don't have a good connection with.
So how important was financial analysis and tracking? That was one thing I expected you to talk to.
Yeah, well, so if you look at portfolio management as being, as I said before, it's a strategic investment governance. The investment side of it is all about the financials, what it's going to do, and risk and reward, right? So what are the risks that it's taking on, to the reward and the alignment to the strategy. And so that financial analysis happens both when at the business case level for investing in particular projects and programs, but then also in terms of how you might either combine projects, freeze projects. It's an ongoing process within that cadence. So certainly, but I would say financial management is one of those things. In the concept of P3M3, which is the maturity model for portfolio program and project management, we use 7 perspectives, and off the top of my head, they are organizational governance, management control, financial management, what's the other ones? Benefits management.
Value streams.
No, that's not one of them, but it's, yeah, that's benefits management. But I think I probably have covered most of them there, but risk management.
I think it's fair to say that EAs will be familiar with those terms, but perhaps being an expert in everything is impossible, right? So,
that's right.
So
yeah.
That deep practical expertise, EAs probably don't have time for in a day because they've got people ring up saying this router's gone down, what do I do? So
yeah,
that's operations.
And a different one person's portfolio of initiatives will be very different to another organisation's. And so, you know, if risk is very high, if the board of that organisation has a very high risk appetite, then you're going to want a good risk management governance framework in there. If it's very high capital cost, then your financial management is going to be more important. You know, they're all important, but it depends on the makeup of your portfolio as well, I think.
It also depends on what phase in the cadence that the organization's up to, right? So as you said, there's a cadence, right?
Yeah.
And so there's often business decision making, and there's finance approval, and then there's execution monitoring and value realization and value monitoring.
Yeah.
And that fits into that cadence, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, benefits management is the one area of project management that I think gets lost more than anything, and yet that's the one that you're trying. The reason you're doing the project is for the benefits.
Yes.
And the one I see that is mismanaged the most is probably benefits management.
So Matt, do you see challenges with, say, enterprise architects and project managers resisting changes to the scope and the and the deliverables of projects because change is fatiguing?
Change is fatiguing, yeah, and scope change, in my view, should only be because you're pivoting for a business requirement. So whether that's an external factor in the market that the organisation is operating in has caused a requirement to do something different, or whether it's an internal factor, that's the only time really that you should be looking at that change, and it needs to be considered very carefully.
Yep. Cool. All right. Well, any further questions, comments, war stories? Any juicy ones out there?
Are there any particular organizations that really adapt well to that EA portfolio manager relationship that you see, like whether it's retail or banking, that particularly it works really well?
I think the more mature the organisation, the more you see it happening well. Certainly, in financial services, it's a highly more regulated than perhaps others, and I think therefore that drives the maturity.
Yep.
So I do see it working better, but then you also see the organic relationship working as well, where a good enterprise architect has come across a good portfolio manager, or the functions are there, and they've found that they need each other and start working well together. But that's more of an organic, growth maturity, in my view.
So where I see the combination of portfolio management EA working extremely well, right? It is a couple of different markets. So the first one is media and entertainment, and it is a survival skill. And the reason I say that is because the success of those organizations is in how they can do things differently in their marketplace. And that shifts because it's a highly competitive market. Consumers are fickle, artists are fickle, and making solid business decisions quickly that can be executed within a short cadence cycle by the EAs in those organizations is mandatory. Otherwise, they will not survive. And I'm working with quite a few executives in that area right now, and they are some of the executives which I would consider the most mature in having a portfolio management EA capability, but they still struggle with managing change. So the other types of organizations I find that respond particularly well are mining and exploration and manufacturing. Right. And what I'm seeing is that because they're making investments of 50 to 70 years in some of this equipment, right? So they buy this big machine that does a specific job and they run it for 50 years and they just keep maintaining it. I mean, that's their asset rundown, right? That if they make a wrong decision about buying that thing, right, because the market shifts, and they're held they're left holding a massive asset that cannot deliver business value, which then becomes a massive sunk cost against their bottom line, right? So for them, front loading that portfolio management and architecture, business architecture, is extremely important to help support that decision. So I can tell you they spend a lot of time cycling through the value propositions and those cadences before they pick up the phone and make that order. Because once they do that, there's no coming back from that. And you can also see that if you look at the annual report of certain large mining companies operate in Western Australia, the nickel market and the iron ore market are being impacted by geopolitical challenges. Have a look at what they're saying in their annual reports about that, and you can then see and think about what Matt and I have been talking about today as essential survival capabilities in the organization.
I'd also add, my previous experience with defence has been back in my Rolls-Royce days over 20 years ago. But I imagine if you look at military and defence organisations would be very good at it, because I think they have to be.
Yeah.
I think they would be very well connected, the portfolio management with their EA.
Yep.
It would be an interesting one to test if anybody does have experience in that field.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So before I hand back to Andrew, one last question for you, Matt. So having worked at Rolls-Royce, right? Did they give you a company car?
He knows that's the question I always used to get asked when I. So no, we didn't get a company car, and of course it was the jet engines business, not the car business that I was in. So.
Well, I'm going to show you a car that's driven by a jet engine, but that's a topic for another time.
Is that why they call you Batman?
Yes,
anyway.
Thank you very much, Matt, for
thank you, Ben,
your input today, and handing back to you, Andrew. What's the next step, Andrew?
Cheers. So Ben and Matt, thank you very much, Phil, for your time. I think next steps, if anybody wants to reach out to Matt or Ben, you've all got my details, so feel free just to message me, and I'll pass any messages on. But really appreciate your time. It's a very different perspective of sort of architecture that we don't normally get. You know, it's normally very technical focused, so I think there's definitely a lot of learnings there. So again, yeah, really appreciate your time, and thank you everyone for giving up your lunch. And yeah, I think I'll let you get back to the rest of your day.
Thanks, Andrew.
Appreciate your time.
Thanks all. Cheers.